Today, there is a rather worrying scenario playing out, and this is based on the debt profile of the country. And the Debt Management Office has come out to give a warning. And the warning is about the threshold of our debt to GDP. And they are now warning that based on the lack of progress or speed in achieving the kind of revenue that Nigeria needs to achieve, there needs to be a caution on the rate of borrowing in the country. So in the report that was released by the Debt Management Office, they're warning the federal government, citing that 73.5% of this year's revenue will be used to service debt. According to the DMO, this high debt service to revenue ratio is unsustainable and poses a threat to debt sustainability. They suggested that raising the projected revenue of the federal government from 10.49 trillion to about 15.5 trillion would be the way to go to be able to sustain that ratio. They have made some recommendations to the federal government in respect of the present state of our debt, some of which you're seeing right here on the screen, the total debt burden of the country. And in fact, whatever state you come from in Nigeria, as of December 2022, you will see the debt burden of your state. There are the subnational debt burden and the total debt burden of the country, state and federal government altogether. Let's get some perspectives to these health funding, the debt burden, and a lot of issues that Nigeria, this warning is coming. Don't forget that there was a time that the government says, look, we might be borrowing, yes, but there isn't any problem because our debt servicing to GDP ratio is still at the normal level. We have not crossed the threshold. The DMO is saying, look, except if we shift our revenue to about 15.5 trillion, that is a comfortable threshold that we can be. But if it's at that 10.49 trillion projection, we might be in trouble. I'm not an economist, and I don't know much about numbers. Let me bring in someone who has a very good understanding of these issues. I'm being joined by an economist, Mr. Fasua, a former presidential candidate. Thank you so much, Mr. Fasua, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sean.
I appreciate it.
Me. Yeah.
How does it come to you? We'll get to Bill Gates' trip to Nigeria and the request of the state governors, the subnational, they are seeking help. The vice president is talking about how we can find health situation. Don't forget that health and education funding in Nigeria is abysmal. The funding is terribly low. And there are those who have said, if you need to develop as a people, you need to heavily fund education and health.
Absolutely.
The livelihoods and the welfare of the people is important to productivity.
Absolutely.
But let's put that aside for a moment. We'll get there. But let's look at the warning coming from the Debt Management Office. Mr. Fasua, from we are okay to we are not okay.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. So the point is that it's a bit intriguing, if I use that word, that a DMO that would usually support government, on our way to where we are today, and they will tell you, the emphasis on debt to GDP and all of that is suddenly changing tack. But perhaps it's strategic because I understand that they just released the report and maybe they're trying to hedge their position by quickly telling the government the worst case scenario. But if you read what they've put out, for me, honestly, I must tell you, in times past, I used to think that the debt scenario was really, really unsustainable. But I went back and studied history, the history of debts. And I think I put out some articles in that respect. And, I found out that, look, we could still do a lot more. The DMO is warning that the debt level has become 37.1% of GDP, and Nigeria set for itself 40%, benchmark to say we shouldn't cross 40%. If you look around Africa alone, you will see that Other countries have been able to leverage their balance sheet. You see, so the balance sheet of a country is as good as the balance sheet of a company. And when you look at those two, a serious-minded company will look at its balance sheet and say, hey, do I have a good balance sheet? Am I bankable? So it's about bankability, okay? So first of all, let's put aside the discussion on revenue to GDP or revenue or debt servicing, for example. Debt servicing to revenue ratio or debt to revenue ratio. That's a good discussion to say, of course, we know that you service your debt using your revenue. That's given, okay? So we have a mandate to drive revenue. And DMO has said that we have to look at driving revenue from 10 trillion to 15.5 trillion. For me, I'd say that, look, you know, you cannot allow your past to define your future. We've had an abysmal run thus far. I believe that the gentleman that is there now, President Bola Tinubu, if you see the way he has hit the ground running, in fact, has surprised almost everybody. And therefore, I think that he's thinking beyond 15 trillion. I think that if you give, you know, in a good year in this country, we should be looking at 20 trillion, 25, 30 trillion of revenue. And those areas are there. So, but back to the issue, I'll let you know. But back to the issue of debt, you know, when you have this debt to GDP ratio, it's a valid ratio. And what countries do with it is that they use it to leverage their balance sheet. Like I said before, you can't run a company and your balance sheet is looking bankable, but you refuse to go to the bank and say, you know what? It's because you're not doing any new project. So, like you said, we have a problem with education. We have a problem with health. I mean, look at the state governors begging Mr. Bill Gates, come and help us. Our people are in the bush. You have to help yourself at the end of the day. You have to develop your human capital. You have to develop infrastructure. And in fact, you know what? Sometimes you may even need to borrow money in order to drive your revenue. So whatever you need to do. So now, the focus is not on borrowing money. The new government is not coming out to say, oh, we want to just go. I mean, look at what happened with the last government. They leaned on the central bank. And before you knew it, the central bank had given out 23.7 trillion. From a 790 billion position when Goodluck Jonathan left, we took it to 23.7 trillion.
And Governor Godwin Obaseki had said about twice that the CBN was printing money.
Indeed, indeed. The truth was that the CBN, you know, give or take, I'm not their spokesman, had no choice but to print money because the government had no idea how to grow revenue.
So Governor Obaseki was right at the time.
Every time you will hear the former Minister of Finance say, we have a revenue problem. What are you doing about it? She did try, and there was a time that she put a certain tax line in the Finance Act of 2022, but the Minister for Communication shut it down in public to say that, look, that's not going to happen. You can't put any more taxes. In telecommunications, they've put so many taxes, I wouldn't allow this one. And the president could not come in to say, you guys, what are you talking about? We need revenue in the country. That was a good tax that they wanted to bring then, though it was going to be on phone calls and text and so 5%, which most people will not feel. But they shut it down, so they were not serious because they always had the central bank to go and blackmail, to go and say, listen, give up. Otherwise, we would have had for many years, we would not have been able to pay policeman's salary or soldier's salary or even civil servant salary. All of that money was, and of course, they got unlucky, COVID hit. And so when COVID hit, everything was haywire. Before then, from 2016, the mismanagement of the economy had started, more than we were used to before. Of course, people felt Jonathan was incompetent. We felt Yaradua was go slow. We even felt Obasanjo was a bit tepid in terms of the kind of growth we needed. Obasanjo perhaps is still the halcyon days, if you think about it now. But I think that we have a new lease of life here. And the people who are there, I mean, you saw them in France. They look like serious-minded people. The president is a deal maker. The man wants to do great things. The kind of numbers, he's not talking about, like I said, don't let your past define your future, all right? The fact that we've been abysmal, we've been suboptimal in the past, the fact that we've been mediocre in the past does not mean that we can't do it. So,
and I'd like to ask you,
if I will conclude, let me just conclude in 1 second. The fact is that this Nigerian balance sheet I'm seeing at 37.1% debt to GDP ratio, after adding everything, including the ways and means, comes about $177 billion. that number, that balance sheet can be leveraged. We can raise good money with that balance sheet and do great development in this country.
Indeed. So, I mean, it will take a lot of creativity, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So when the government,
creative people.
Yeah, when the government says we have a revenue problem, now the DMO has come back, and I've had several conversations on this program to talking to people who understand policy and who understand finance and government accounting on how we have a major problem. But how do we get out of it? It needs a lot of creativity. We've removed subsidy. There is inflation in the land. Is gotten as bad. I mean, it couldn't have been worse than it's been in the last 15 years. It's astronomical. But where do we go from here? You seem to have seen a crystal ball. Absolutely. What does your crystal ball tell you? Where is the money? Where are you seeing the money? You've talked about almost 30 trillion. Where are we going to get that from?
You know, so I've been reading a lot about what's going on in the maritime sector alone in this country, the customs. You know, the Abiru committee actually recommended that the custom be fused with FIRS like it is done in the UK and so on, HMRC and so on. You know, so within custom alone, we're losing a lot of money. NIMASA, MPA, not to talk of, you know, the aviation sector as well. There's so many leakages. Do you know that in this country, less than 20% of registered companies, you know, take payee from their staff or even remit. That means you have 80% to go for. Less than 15% of registered companies actually pay taxes. Those who pay taxes are those who have to, maybe because they're looking for government contract. You have a smorgasbord, okay, a raft of ideas to pursue on company income taxes, on petroleum profit taxes. Look at the petroleum sector. Now, all of a sudden, thankfully, we went back to being the biggest producer in Africa in the month of May. You know, in April, we dropped down to second to Angola. Now we're back to 1.3 million, in the month of May, 1.3 million. If we can capacitate that sector, and the new president is an oil man, he has said that, listen, I'm ready to do deals with these guys. If I'm taking 60% before, I can take 40%. He said, if I get the money out, I can do what they call deferred profit. I can raise money based on my deferred profit that I haven't actually made, but based on the deals that I've done. Look, it's about creativity. Running a country and developing a country is about creativity. It's not about, you know, if it's just about resuming to work, you know, carrying files up and down and paying salaries for those who are not working, and at the end of the day, you rue your fate, you know. But there's so many places we can, look, FIRS, and I've had some discussions with them before, you can take, they did the best numbers last year, 10.1 trillion in FIRS.
Alone? That's yes, one agency of government alone? Yeah,
well, of course, that is where you kind of agglomerate most of it. But there are many GOEs, government-owned enterprises, and you can see what Tinubu has done. We one fell swoop, wrote one memo and said, take all those guys out. Buhari could not sack even the people that were appointed by PDP in 2015. But Bola Tinubu has said, look, let these guys go and rest. He wants to bring in new blood. So two things. We have the FIRS, 10.1 trillion. They target 12 trillion this year. You can challenge them to do 16, 17 trillion. Then you can go to all those GOEs, those government-owned enterprises who will collect revenue on behalf of the people of this country and spend 95% on themselves.
So I wanted to add to, I mean, your line of thought. Maybe you can expatiate on that. There are those who are suggesting that there are assets of this nation that are moribund. Some of them are not performing, that we could sell.
Well,
I mean, is that a way to go?
Well, I call that Teribanomics, which after my senior brother, Dr. Ayo Teriba, you know, he has been pushing that, and he talks about equity as against debt. So here we are talking about debt, which is what the remit of the DMO is. You know, let's go and raise debt, you know, which are short-term transactions, you know, and stuff like that. So they are talking about you can raise equity, okay, by actually selling off. Two problems. Number one, remember that our people are very, very aware and feisty as well. If you're talking about selling government properties forever, people are going to say, listen, you're selling this, you're selling the family heirloom. What authority do you have to do that? However, what I found out was that in Brazil, that is just in the remit of the NIPC. Nigeria Investment Promotion Council should list alongside the other investment opportunities that they have to say that, look, we have Ajaokuta. Ajaokuta is there, moribund, sitting down. A 100 billion naira project, $1 billion project, sitting down there. You can as well settle that up because we can't run it. The model by which countries used to run companies before, like refineries, is gone forever. Especially for us, because we did not build the capacity to be able to run these things on our own. All of our refineries are moribund now because we don't manufacture those equipment. If you went to places like Houston, you will see refineries that have been around for 100 years. We've run ours for 40 years, 50 years, and they are down. Some of them vandalized forever. Though we're waiting until maybe November this year when the NNPC said that Kaduna will be back in operation. But hey, refineries can no longer be run by civil servants in anywhere. It can be, so you can,
refineries,
sell all those
refineries,
ones
Mr. Fasua,
but mind you, you can't just sell anything and everything. Yeah.
4 refineries are not working. Workers are being retained in their hundreds.
Honestly,
they're paying salaries, they're going to work.
That is very
no money.
easy.
I mean, what kind of...
Spin them off.
What kind of...
Like I said, civil servants cannot ever run refineries again. Refineries are serious business. See what Dangote has built in Lagos. You can't put civil servants there who probably get there anytime they want to. Will probably sabotage some of the equipment because you didn't promote them or send them.
I mean, I've spoken to a minister who said, Mr. Fasua, I've spoken to a minister who said in an interview that our refineries are largely destroyed by saboteurs.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying.
We'll take a break. We'll take a break.
Civil servants do whatever they want.
We'll take a break and we'll look at what Tinubu can do. There are those who believe that Nigerians will have to tighten their belts the more. There are tough times ahead. It's going to take another 6 months of us feeling the pinch, and it's going to get as worse before it starts getting better.